Welcome back to personalization for the wavering travel customer. This is part two, so if you haven't seen part one yet, please go ahead and watch that and come back. Otherwise, it's probably not going to make a lot of sense to you. In part two, I'm going to be providing an overview of what we accomplished in part one and talk about how to extend that to outbound channels to help stay engaged with customers after they've left our inbound channels, such as the web. From there, I'm going to jump into a demo of Pinpoint from a user perspective, but also show you a few things that are relevant for power users or administrators in terms of integrating that with Personalize and what we did in part one. Finally, I'm going to wrap up with how you might apply what you've learned in these two videos to other industries outside of travel, into finance and insurance, for example. I'm also going to talk about AWS Personalize and Pinpoint, how they might fit within your ecosystem at your organization, and talk a bit about how they fit within the broader AWS ecosystem as well and why that's important. Okay, so let's move on to sustaining engagement by adding these outbound channels. So what did we do in part one? So part one, we had our mock travel website, and we were pushing in clickstream data to Amazon Personalize. So this was the various hotels that we were clicking on. The output of that through Personalize's neural network was, of course, recommendations, and this was important because we were able to see how Personalized was tolerant of that rapidly changing intent. I'd like to have an inexpensive hotel. I'd like to have an expensive hotel, as I was able to rapidly move between recommendations that were relevant for those changing preferences. So we had a very financial or dollar amount focused way of seeing Personalized handle the situation. Of course, it's able to handle other things such as interest in particular hotel features or star ratings and locations. So how can we extend this? So if someone has left our website, we're looking to re-engage with them. Assuming we have permission, one great way to do that is to use Amazon Pinpoint, which is AWS's outbound messaging and customer engagement service. I'm going to focus on the email channel for this service within this video. You should know that it does support a variety of other channels out of the box, such as SMS and mobile push. It's also flexible enough to add on custom channels quite easily. The other AWS services that I'm going to introduce as part of the demo are DynamoDB and AWS Lambda. And really what I'm using these for is to enrich the recommendation data that I'm getting from Personalize. Personalize is going to offer me, or sorry, produce for me the list of recommended hotels using a hotel ID, but it doesn't tell me things like the hotel location, star rating, price, discounted price, and so on. So we need a way of taking that enriched data, making it available for our email service so that when we go to engage with the customer, we can talk about these things and it's relevant and engaging. So this isn't the only architecture pattern that you might consider. If you're someone watching this from a large organization, even mid-market organization, you probably already have a marketing automation tool. So these are some popular ones that are here. Of course, Adobe, Salesforce, and there's some host of other popular vendors as well. AWS Personalize is no different from other AWS services in that they like to integrate with things and they can do so in quite elegantly in a lot of cases. There's one really low cost, low capital intensive way of trying out Personalize to see if it's going to add value to your situation. It does offer batch recommendations. So that means you can have a totally manual process to say, here's what Amazon Personalize recommends, and I'm going to see from my outbound channels manually whether those recommendations are any good. Of course, it does support more robust ways of integrating in a real-time fashion, which is closer to what I'll show you with Pinpoint, but you could start with a batch recommendation. So I'll talk more about the AWS Personalize and Pinpoint and their relationship to things you already have and how you can enhance and get additional value of your existing investments. We'll save that for the wrap up. For now, let's move on to a demonstration of Pinpoint and that integration with Personalize. All right, so let's take a closer look at AWS Pinpoint and that integration with AWS Personalize. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to introduce you to concepts and show you things in kind of a progressing order of technicalness. So we're going to start off with a very much end user or marketer role, and we're kind of progress from there to power user to administrator to someone that would be more of an architect or developer. Um, with that, I'm going to pull up my console here. So I've got AWS Pinpoint that's we're looking at the splash screen here. Um, my intention is not to show you everything there is to do with Pinpoint. I'm going to link into the description some of the resources. There's tons of resources on everything you'd want to know about Pinpoint, and I'll include those links on the page that you found this video on as well. So what I'm trying to do here is close the loop on our travel story and that integration with Pinpoint, not give you a comprehensive understanding of Pinpoint. So I'm going to go click on Manage Projects. I've got an existing one here, and I'm going to click under Journeys and create a journey. You can probably guess what that is, especially if you have been looking at products like where you own Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Adobe Campaign, for example. So I'm a good marketer, so I'm going to think about event-based and triggered-based campaigns because I know they drive their higher satisfaction because they're more relevant. So I'm going to start my journey with a abandoned browse trigger. So this is someone who's looked at or users that have looked at hotels but didn't ultimately make a purchase or a booking at that time. So from there, again, the intent is not for me to show you all of the features behind Pinpoint, but I am going to show a multivariate split because it does tie into one of the concepts that I talked about in part one. So what can I do with a multivariate split? Well, if we go back to our presentation from part one, we introduced this concept of the different phases of the buying journey. So there was a talk I linked to from United Airlines. We talked about that progression from Inspire, Book, the airport experience, the onboard experience, and post-travel. These are all opportunities in different phases to interact and engage with customers. So what if we had a slightly different variation of our email communication, depending if someone was in the Inspire stage or Book. This is how we might use it. We might solve for that. We might solve it with the multivariate split. So I'm going to introduce two branches here. In branch A, I'm going to say it's a segment I've already defined called Inspire. So there's that early stage of the booking process, and I'm going to add a segment for branch B, which is going to be ready to book. So we could have variations of the message depending on where someone's at. From here, of course, a good marketer would be expected to put in a holdout group so they can tell whether what we're doing is statistically significant or not, and if it's lifting over the control. From there, we can add our actual activity. So I'm going to select email here. So up until this point, you've got a very low level of technical skill set for a marketer. Let's go to the next level of skill set, which is someone who might be a little more familiar with HTML and how to configure creative content, that sort of thing. So I'm going to choose an email template. There's one I've already previously configured called recommended hotels. So we're going to edit that, which will take a couple clicks here. So this is that email template authoring experience, HTML on the left and a preview of what that looks like on the right. So what's interesting about this when it comes to tying into Personalize is here are all the attributes of the hotel that I can introduce here, and the way this is working, which I'll show you in the next technical part of this step, is that's the enrichment data I talked about with DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL database, and AWS Lambda, which is a serverless function service. So that's where those are coming from. I'll show you how that works. So what could you do here as a less technical user, assuming your friends in IT or your more technical users have provided this enriched hotel data for you, you're able to interactively decide where those go, and you're able to use some tokens to do that. So in this case, we've got an experience that has the hotel name, and we've got an image representing that hotel that's directly underneath it. An example of what that looks like when it hits your inbox is this one here that I've sent myself. So we've got an image for each hotel, and of course the hotel name that's here. So that's sort of level one, level two level of technical ability to show you as part of the solution. Now we're going to kind of ramp things up to things you might not necessarily change every day. They might be once a month, or it might be more of an administrator or architect that's changing things, or a developer. So it's not your day-to-day end user. So from there, I'm going to go to back to our project here. And we've got something called machine learning models that's over on the left-hand side here. So this is where I've defined my integration between Pinpoint and Personalize. So this one's pre-configured, but I can show you what I've done there. This is where I'm selecting the recommender model from Pinpoint. And in this case, it's called Hotel Recommendations. You can see that recommendations can come in two flavors. They can be the customer, or the user, that unique customer. You've got a golden record for the customer, or it could be the endpoint. Endpoint is analogous to device ID, for example. So it's your tablet, your phone, and so on. The last thing that's on here is you can see there's a reference to a Lambda function. So mine's called enrich reco, or enrich my recommendations. That's where I'm stitching together the additional details about the hotel, such as location and number of stars. And you can see there is oh, it doesn't like that. So let me try here. Okay, so it's happy now. You can see there's this mapping interface that's here. So I'm able to say, if as I introduce new attributes that are relevant for the email, I'm able to expose those. So let's take a look at where this enrichment data is stored. So I'll go up to services, and I'll show you my DynamoDB database. So for my purposes, this is my library of hotels and the data that's there. So you can see there's an interface for browsing through my list of hotels. So in my case, there's only 10 hotels, of course, but this obviously scales to thousands or even millions of destinations. The user experience here is, I think, good enough that if you had to make manual edits or do queries and filter through and manage these here, I think it'd be reasonable to do that. However, many organizations, they already have an existing CRM system, or order system, or other inventory systems that are managing these things. Think of DynamoDB in that case as a place where you might synchronize it with your existing system, and then you're able to manage it and expose it to Pinpoint here more easily. So that's DynamoDB. The last service that that makes up the, I need to be able to spell Lambda here. Let's try again. There we go. Is Lambda, and I'm going to show you some code, but I don't expect you to understand what the code's doing, or nor should you. I just want to show it to you for a very specific reason, which is to remind you that everything I've shown you in that integration, it is powered by a very open ecosystem. So this is the code in order to take those recommendations from Personalize and expose them to Pinpoint. This can be adapted to your own marketing automation tool as well. And so yes, it is code, and this is where you can see me exposing things such as the name, or the images, or this can be extended to different attributes of the hotel. Reason I'm showing this to you is if you compare this sort of architecture, this sort of way of building a solution, it's incredibly open, and in my experience, that is a very good thing when it comes to building robust solutions that don't trap you into a corner. So you might be looking at various point solutions that get you up and running very quickly to deliver similar use cases to the one I'm describing here. But as soon as you try and deviate from those use cases, even slightly, you tend to outgrow your solution. And that can be the case for point solutions, but it can even be the case for certain large enterprise marketing software as well. Reason I'm showing this is it's incredibly open and transparent, so you're able to you're in a less likely scenario that you're going to be trapped into a corner and get stuck with a gotcha. So that's why I've shown you that. So from here, I'm going to wrap things up and talk a bit about how you'd apply this story to other industries, as well as kind of looking at things in the broader AWS ecosystem and your own marketing stack. So we're going to wrap up with how you can apply what we've learned in our travel story to other industries. And then I'm going to talk about how some of the services that have introduced Pinpoint and Personalize apply within the larger AWS ecosystem, why that matters, and why it matters when you think about your own ecosystem, your own infrastructure. So the first industry I'd like to talk about personalization and AWS Personalize and Pinpoint around is the banking one. And banking and finance, it's very easy to get trapped into a very product-centric way of thinking of things. You say, well, I've got checking accounts, I've got credit cards, and so on. And you might say to yourself, well, I just don't have enough products for me to warrant this type of recommendation engine. And that's true if you're looking at just purely the next product. So some of the scenarios or use cases you might want to consider in finance is you might want to look at your rewards program where there tends to be an abundance of offers there within that credit card program, for example. But in terms of being helpful to the end consumer, take a look at what product education materials you might have and how those are being consumed, or they could more easily be consumed by consumers that are educating themselves about a new credit product, for example. They never had a mortgage before, and they're looking for some resources on that, which you probably already have on your website. From a investment standpoint, investor insights and content around market trends or specific sectors or ideas, those are things that you could be surfacing in a recommendation engine-based way using Personalize. It could be just general financial advice as well. So think about AWS Personalize when it comes to the finance sector. How can I take existing content and resources where I have a variety of information and surface those to the consumer more easily? For the insurance sector, very similar story. If you think about a number of products, there's very few, right? It might be just you've got P&C or you've got life. There's only so many sub products within those. So step outside that product box and think about other services and content that you might already have. So you might have a wellness program where, again, there's rewards there, or there's a series of educational messages that you could be optimizing and recommending there. You could also think about using AWS Personalize in a way that is complementary to more like a search function. So someone who's searching for something, how do you raise those to the surface before they even ask for them in some cases? So it could be finding a local provider, it could be coverage questions, or it could be something about navigating a claim or some common claim issues and being able to surface those messages at the appropriate time. When it comes to telco, individual, overarching plans or devices, there may not be that many, but when you start to think about the various combinations of device, the plan or the subplan, the add-ons, you get into a lot of combinations of those, and that's where Personalize can help. That's the obvious case, but the less obvious ones might be, again, surfacing up self-help articles when it might come to technical issues. It might be related to more billing, so if there's a large bill and understanding that. So those might be the other type of content that you're able to recommend up. Um, B2B is it's an easier one as well because there tends to be a lot of different products, a lot of product variety. It tends to be, similar to retail in that capacity. But don't forget about your demand gen content and those white papers, those webinars, being able to surface those at the right time. Recommend those. That's where you're going to add a lot of value with a service like Personalize. So the solutions that we've been looking at are not point solutions. They're part of that larger AWS ecosystem. And of course, that introduces other benefits that you might consider when you're introducing other AWS services that are part of your ecosystem. So one way of illustrating this point is to think about AWS Pinpoint as at the center of your customer engagement ecosystem. So why would that be important? Well, you might have or plan to have your data lake hosted on AWS using services like S3. Just by doing that, you've now put your customer profile data a lot closer to Pinpoint and your outbound engagement tool, which solves you a huge headache when it comes to data redundancy, data latency, those sorts of things. As a marketer, you're expected to be doing all kinds of segmentation and analysis. You might be using tools in the AWS ecosystem to do that, such as the Hadoop ecosystem tools, in this case AWS EMR, or you might be looking at or are using Kinesis for your data streaming analysis. So those are already there in the cloud, of course. Um, for events and predictions, as I was saying, a good marketer should have very triggered event-based campaigns that are going to drive that relevancy. AWS Personalize is just one example of a prediction service that's within AWS. Others include the SageMaker and SageMaker Studio service that have a whole host of other models that you could be implementing, many of which are off the shelf. Um, and beyond that, the world changes and new channels and new services are introduced all the time. One of the bigger trends is around interactive voice, and AWS is already a leader there. So being able to tap into those services is a big benefit. This point of view is a very AWS-centric one, and I don't expect everyone to subscribe fully to this. I think a more common situation is something that would look a little closer to the architecture that I started with earlier in this video, which is this mix of picking the services that are the ones that are most likely to add value or complement existing investments. So in this case, I'm suggesting the use of personalized to enhance recommendations to these existing marketing stack tools. But all of these other services that I included in this ecosystem, they play well with others, right? So it could mean integrating some of these others at other portions. For example, one common use case is to use Pinpoint to introduce SMS capability to some of these existing vendors that we have here, where their SMS capability might not be as robust as Pinpoint or able to deliver globally, which is something Pinpoint does very well. Yeah, don't it, the more important thing to look at these services is to say, well, what I've shown you here today, Personalized, Pinpoint, they're not monolithic applications. They're designed to complement your existing investments that you've already made in your ecosystem. I'd love to hear about what use cases you think are relevant for yourself based on these videos. And I'd also love to hear about what types of gaps that you see in your stack that you could potentially fill with AWS services. So please reach out, spadinabus.com/contact to reach out, and look forward to having that discussion with you.